You watch others win easily while you fight twice as hard and still lose. Every challenge feels impossible while others seem to have all the advantages. You pour your heart into every effort, yet somehow you remain invisible when opportunities arise. You're starting to wonder if some people are just born lucky, born with talents you'll never possess. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient warrior whose strategies have helped leaders win for over 2,500 years. I once stood where you stand, now defeated, frustrated, watching others succeed where I had failed. But what I discovered about becoming unbeatable changed everything, not just for me, but for every leader who has studied my teachings since. What I learned about true invincibility will change how you face every challenge in your life. The same secrets that made my armies unstoppable can make you unstoppable too. But first, like this video, subscribe for more winning wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see which part of the world is ready to become unbeatable. Let me tell you about the broken sword I carry, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. This blade shattered during my first crushing defeat, the day I learned that winning isn't about strength, courage, or even numbers. It's about something far more profound. I was born in the ancient kingdom of Wu, during a time when China was torn apart by warring states. Every day brought news of battles, shifting alliances, and fallen kingdoms. My father served as a minor military officer, and I grew up believing that victory belonged to the brave and the strong. I trained with weapons from childhood, studied the great battles of our ancestors, and dreamed of glory on the battlefield. When I received my first command, I was filled with confidence. I had 100 good men under my leadership, all eager to prove themselves. We faced a smaller force, maybe 60 enemy soldiers, and I was certain we would crush them easily. I remember the weight of my sword in my hand, the sound of armor clanging as we charged forward, the battle cry that erupted from our throats. We were destroyed, not just defeated, utterly crushed. My sword broke against an enemy shield, and I watched helplessly as my men fell round me. We outnumbered them, we were better equipped, we fought with tremendous heart. Yet within an hour, half my force was dead or wounded, and the rest of us fled in shame. That night, as I sat in the darkness holding the pieces of my broken blade, I faced a truth that shattered my pride more completely than any weapon could. Everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong. Strength meant nothing if it was poorly directed. Courage was useless without wisdom. Numbers were meaningless without strategy. I had focused on building muscles when I should have been building my mind. I had practiced sword forms when I should have been studying human nature. I had dreamed of heroic charges when I should have been learning the subtle arts of positioning, timing, and psychological warfare. This defeat haunted me for months. While other young officers boasted about their victories, I replayed my failure over and over, searching for the lessons hidden. In that humiliation, I began to understand that the enemy commander hadn't beaten us through superior strength. He had beaten us through superior thinking. He had chosen the battlefield, forcing us to attack uphill. He had positioned his men so that our numerical advantage meant nothing. We could only engage a few at a time. Most importantly, he had understood something about warfare that I was just beginning to glimpse. The battle is won or lost before the first sword is drawn. This realization changed everything about how I approached conflict. I stopped focusing on how to fight and started focusing on how to win. I began studying not just tactics, but strategy, not just combat, but psychology, not just strength, but positioning. Today, whether you're facing a difficult boss, trying to advance your career, building a business, or navigating a complex relationship, you're making the same mistake I made. You're focusing on working harder when you should be focusing on working smarter. You're building strength when you should be building strategy. The bamboo scrolls where I first recorded my strategies are yellowed with age now, but the wisdom they contain remains as sharp as a freshly forged blade. These manuscripts represent years of obsessive study, countless sleepless nights, and the gradual birth of what would become the art of war. After my devastating defeat, I became consumed with understanding the true nature of victory. I wasn't content to simply learn from my own mistakes, needed to understand every pattern of success and failure I could find. I studied every battle in our kingdom's history, interviewed veteran commanders, and analyzed conflicts from neighboring states. I spent months traveling to battlefields, examining the terrain where great victories and crushing defeats had occurred. I would stand in these places for hours, imagining how the battles unfolded, trying to understand the decisions that determined the outcomes. Why did one army triumph while another, seemingly stronger force, collapsed? The breakthrough came when I stopped looking at individual battles and started looking at patterns. I began to see that successful commanders weren't just lucky or naturally gifted, they followed certain principles. Whether they realized it or not, they understood positioning. They grasped the importance of timing. They knew how to use deception and how to gather intelligence. Most importantly, they understood that war isn't really about fighting. It's about creating conditions where victory becomes inevitable. I started keeping detailed notes on bamboo strips, recording every insight, every pattern, every principle I discovered. At first, these were just personal observations, reminders for my own future campaigns. But as the collection grew, I realized I was documenting something much larger, complete system for achieving victory in any conflict. The real test came when I was given another command. This time, instead of relying on courage and strength, I applied everything I had learned. I spent weeks studying my enemy, understanding their habits, their weaknesses, their likely responses to different situations. I chose the battlefield carefully, positioned my forces strategically, and used deception to create confusion in their ranks. The battle was over before it truly began. We achieved complete victory with minimal casualties, not through superior fighting, but through superior thinking. Word of this success spread, and soon other commanders were asking me to share my methods. I began teaching these principles to anyone willing to learn, but I realized that spoken lessons weren't enough. These insights needed to be preserved, refined, and passed down to future generations. That's when I decided to organize my bamboo notes into a comprehensive guide. I wanted to create something that would prevent other young commanders from suffering the defeats I had endured. I wanted to give them the tools to win, not through luck or natural talent, but through understanding the eternal principles that govern all conflict. The result was the art of war, not just a military manual, but a guide to achieving victory. In any competitive situation, these principles work because they're based on fundamental truths about human nature, strategic thinking, and the dynamics of conflict that never change, whether you're commanding armies or leading a sales team. The bamboo scrolls where I first recorded my strategies are yellowed with age now, but the wisdom they contain remains as sharp as a freshly forged blade. These manuscripts represent years of obsessive study, countless sleepless nights, and the gradual birth of what would become the art of war. After my devastating defeat, I became consumed with understanding the true nature of victory. I wasn't content to simply learn from my own mistakes. I needed to understand every pattern of success and failure I could find. I studied every battle in our kingdom's history, interviewed veteran commanders, and analyzed conflicts from neighboring states. I spent months traveling to battlefields, examining the terrain where great victories and crushing defeats had occurred. I would stand in these places for hours, imagining how the battles unfolded, trying to understand the decisions that determined the outcomes. Why did one army triumph while another, seemingly stronger force, collapsed? The breakthrough came when I stopped looking at individual battles and started looking at patterns. I began to see that successful commanders weren't just lucky or naturally gifted, they followed certain principles. Whether they realized it or not, they understood positioning. They grasped the importance of timing. They knew how to use deception and how to gather intelligence. Most importantly, they understood that war isn't really about fighting. It's about creating conditions where victory becomes inevitable. I started keeping detailed notes on bamboo strips, recording every insight, every pattern, every principle I discovered. At first, these were just personal observations, reminders for my own future campaigns. But as the collection grew, I realized I was documenting something much larger, complete system for achieving victory in any conflict. The real test came when I was given another command. This time, instead of relying on courage and strength, I applied everything I had learned. I spent weeks studying my enemy, understanding their habits, their weaknesses, their likely responses to different situations. I chose the battlefield carefully, positioned my forces strategically, and used deception to create confusion in their ranks. The battle was over before it truly began. We achieved complete victory with minimal casualties, not through superior fighting, but through superior thinking. Word of this success spread, and soon other commanders were asking me to share my methods. I began teaching these principles to anyone willing to learn, but I realized that spoken lessons weren't enough. These insights needed to be preserved, refined, and passed down to future generations. That's when I decided to organize my bamboo notes into a comprehensive guide. I wanted to create something that would prevent other young commanders from suffering the defeats I had endured. I wanted to give them the tools to win, not through luck or natural talent, but through understanding the eternal principles that govern all conflict. The result was the art of war, not just a military manual, but a guide to achieving victory in any competitive situation. These principles work because they're based on fundamental truths about human nature, strategic thinking, and the dynamics of conflict that never change, whether you're commanding armies or leading a sales team. The jade ring I gave to my most trusted spies was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of the intelligence network that won more battles than all my armies combined. This small piece of carved stone represented a truth that most commanders never grasp. Information is the ultimate weapon. I learned early that battles are won by those who see clearly, not those who fight fiercely. While other generals focused on training their soldiers, I focused on understanding my enemies. I built the most effective spy network in ancient China because I understood that knowing your opponent's plans, weaknesses, and psychology gives you an advantage that no amount of courage or strength can overcome. My spies weren't just soldiers who happened to gather information. They were carefully selected individuals who could blend into enemy camps, befriend opposing officers, and observe without being detected. Some posed as merchants, others as entertainers or servants. Each wore a jade ring that identified them to my network, while appearing to be simple decoration to outsiders. Through these agents, I learned that successful intelligence gathering isn't about dramatic infiltration or stolen documents. It's about patient observation and understanding human nature. People reveal their plans, fears, and weaknesses constantly. You just need to know how to listen. I discovered that enemy commanders would often discuss strategy while drinking, assuming their conversations were private. My spies learned to serve wine and fade into the background. I found that officers would complain about supply shortages, troop morale, or political pressures when they thought only trusted friends were listening. These casual complaints revealed more about enemy capabilities than any formal military assessment. One of my greatest victories came entirely through intelligence. I learned that an opposing general was planning to attack our supply lines at dawn on a specific day. Instead of simply defending those supplies, I used this knowledge to set a trap. I moved the real supplies to safety and filled the original location with soldiers disguised as merchants. When the enemy attacked what they thought were defenseless supply wagons, they found themselves surrounded by armed warriors. The battle was over in minutes, and we captured the entire enemy force without losing a single man. This victory wasn't won through superior fighting, it was won through superior information. But intelligence gathering isn't just about spies and secret information. The most valuable insights often come from careful observation of public behavior. I learned to read an enemy's confidence level from how his sentries stood their posts. I could assess troop morale by listening to the songs soldiers sang round their campfires. I could predict a commander's likely strategies by understanding his personality, his training, and his past decisions. In your modern battles, whether in business, relationships, or personal challenges, the same principles apply. Your competitors reveal their strategies through their actions, their hiring decisions, their marketing messages. Your colleagues show their motivations through their behavior, their priorities, their responses to pressure. The key is to observe without judging, to listen without assuming, and to gather information systematically rather than casually. Most people make decisions based on what they hope is true about their opposition. Winners make decisions based on what they know is true. Understanding your enemy doesn't mean becoming paranoid or cynical. It means being realistic about the competitive forces you face and the human nature that drives them. When you truly understand your opposition, their strengths, weaknesses, motivations, and likely responses, you can position yourself to win before the contest even begins. The War Council table, where I made my most crucial decisions, bears the scars of countless meetings where I chose not to fight. These marks remind me that the supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Truth that transformed how I approached every conflict. Most people think strategy is about how to win battles. I learned that true strategy is about which battles to fight in the first place. The greatest victories I achieved were conflicts I never entered, problems I solved without confrontation, and objectives I reached by avoiding direct competition entirely. Early in my career, I measured success by the number of battles won. I sought out conflicts, eager to prove my tactical skills and build my reputation. But as I matured, I realized that every battle, even a victory, comes with cost, casualties, resources, time, and political consequences. The most successful commanders minimize these costs by winning through positioning rather than fighting. Remember a situation where a rival kingdom threatened our borders with a massive army. My king expected me to march out and meet them in battle. Instead, I spent weeks studying their situation. I learned that their army was far from home, their supply lines were stretched thin, and their alliance was held together by a single charismatic leader who had many enemies. Rather than attack their army, I sent small forces to disrupt their supplies, while my agents spread rumors about their leader's true intentions among his allies. Within a month, the alliance collapsed. The leader was assassinated by his own supporters, and the threat dissolved without a single battle. We achieved complete victory without losing a single soldier. This taught me to evaluate every potential conflict through specific criteria. First, I ask, can I achieve my objective without fighting? Often, what appears to be a necessary battle is actually an optional confrontation. Many goals can be reached through negotiation, positioning, alliance building, or simply waiting for circumstances to change. Second, if I must fight, can I choose the time and place? Accepting battle on your enemy's terms is usually a mistake. Superior positioning, whether physical, psychological, or strategic, can make victory inevitable, while poor positioning can make even victory costly. Third, What are the real costs of winning? A victory that exhausts your resources, damages important relationships, or creates powerful enemies may be worse than avoiding the conflict entirely. I learned to consider not just immediate tactical outcomes, but long-term strategic consequences. Fourth, is this battle moving me toward my ultimate objective? Sometimes people get so focused on individual conflicts that they lose sight of their larger goals. Winning a battle that doesn't advance your strategic position is often a waste of resources. In modern life, this wisdom applies everywhere. The colleague who tries to prove they're right in every meeting wastes political capital on trivial issues. The entrepreneur who responds to every competitor wastes energy that could be spent on innovation. The person who argues every point in a relationship wins debates but loses connection. The most successful people I've observed choose their battles carefully. They let small issues go, avoid unnecessary confrontations, and reserve their energy for conflicts that truly matter. When they do engage, they've positioned themselves so thoroughly that victory is nearly certain. Remember, the goal isn't to fight well, it's to achieve your objectives. Sometimes that requires conflict, but more often it requires the wisdom to win without fighting at all. The water clock that sits beside my war council table taught me one of the most valuable lessons in strategy. Timing matters more than strength, preparation, or even position. This ancient timepiece measured not just hours, but the rhythm of opportunity, the precise moments when action becomes irresistible. I learned about timing through a painful mistake that nearly cost me everything. Early in my command, I discovered an enemy weakness, a gap in their defenses that could be exploited for easy victory. Excited by this opportunity, I immediately ordered an attack. We charged through the gap, only to discover it was a trap. The enemy had deliberately left their defenses weak to lure us into a carefully prepared ambush. My eagerness had blinded me to the signs that the timing was wrong. The gap appeared too obvious, too convenient. A truly skilled enemy wouldn't leave such an opening unless they wanted us to find it. I had focused on the opportunity without considering whether the moment was right to seize it. This defeat taught me to watch for the subtle indicators that reveal when timing is optimal. I began to understand that opportunities have natural rhythms. They emerge gradually, reach peak readiness, then fade if not seized. The art lies in recognizing these phases and acting at the moment of maximum advantage. Real opportunities rarely announce themselves obviously. Instead, they emerge through the convergence of multiple factors: enemy weakness, your own readiness, favorable external conditions, and the alignment of supporting elements. I learned to wait for this convergence rather than rushing toward partial opportunities. I developed a system for reading the signs of perfect timing. In warfare, I looked for specific indicators: enemy troops showing signs of fatigue or low morale, supply shortages affecting their capabilities, internal conflicts weakening their unity, or weather conditions favoring my tactical approach. When several of these factors align, I knew the moment for action had arrived. One of my most decisive victories came from this patient approach. For months, I observed an enemy fortress that seemed impregnable. Every tactical analysis suggested that a direct assault would fail with massive casualties, but I continued watching, waiting for the conditions to shift. I noticed that the fortress defenders followed predictable routines. Their patrols walked the same paths at the same times. Their shift changes occurred at regular intervals. Most importantly, their confidence in their defenses had made them complacent. They paid less attention during certain hours when attacks seemed unlikely. I waited until all conditions aligned. A moonless night, a shift change that left fewer guards on duty, a recent celebration that had left many defenders hungover, and a supply shortage that had reduced their reserve forces. When I finally struck, The fortress fell in less than an hour with minimal losses. The same principle applies to every aspect of modern life. The entrepreneur who launches too early burns through resources before the market is ready. The professional who pushes for promotion before demonstrating readiness often damages their reputation. The investor who buys at market peaks rather than waiting for optimal entry points loses money even when choosing good assets. Patience isn't passive waiting. It's active preparation combined with careful observation. While you wait for optimal timing, you prepare thoroughly, gather resources, build capabilities, and position yourself to act decisively when the moment arrives. The cavalry whip I carried into battle represents more than authority over horses. It symbolizes the lightning-fast execution that can turn even modest advantages into overwhelming victories. Speed, when properly applied, multiplies force and creates opportunities that slower competitors cannot counter. I discovered the power of rapid action during a campaign where I was outnumbered 3-1. Conventional wisdom suggested defensive positioning, waiting for reinforcements, or seeking favorable terrain for a prolonged battle. Instead, I chose speed over safety and struck before my enemy could fully deploy their superior numbers. The attack came at dawn, faster than they thought possible. While they were still organizing their formations and distributing orders, my forces had already penetrated their camp and captured their command center. By the time they realized what was happening, the battle was essentially over. Speed had given my smaller force the impact of a much larger army, but speed without preparation is merely recklessness. The velocity that wins battles comes from intensive, advanced preparation combined with decisive execution. Every swift action I took was built on months of careful planning, resource gathering, and tactical preparation. When the moment came to move, everything was already in place. I learned to distinguish between different types of speed. There's the speed of decision-making, recognizing opportunities and committing to action while others are still analyzing. There's the speed of execution, moving from decision to implementation faster than competitors can respond. And there's the speed of adaptation, adjusting tactics in real time. As situations evolve, decision speed often matters most. In rapidly changing situations, the first to commit to a clear course of action gains enormous advantages. While enemies debate options and seek consensus, quick decision-makers are already implementing their plans. This doesn't mean making hasty choices. It means having the confidence and preparation to choose rapidly when the moment demands it. I remember facing an enemy commander known for his deliberate, methodical approach. He never made mistakes because he analyzed everything thoroughly before acting. But this strength became his weakness when I forced him into situations requiring immediate response. By the time he had gathered all the information he wanted, the opportunities had passed. Execution speed comes from eliminating unnecessary steps and streamlining processes. I spent countless hours drilling my forces on rapid deployment, quick formation changes, and instant response to signals. When action was required, we moved like a single organism rather than a collection of individuals trying to coordinate. Surprise amplifies the impact of speed. When opponents don't expect swift action, they're mentally and physically unprepared to respond effectively. I learned to strike when enemies assumed I needed more time to prepare, when they thought conditions weren't favorable for attack, or when their attention was focused elsewhere. The most effective surprises don't rely on deception alone. They come from doing the logical thing faster than anyone expects. Competitors often see the same opportunities you do, but if you can seize them while others are still preparing, you gain advantages that become very difficult to overcome. In modern applications, this translates to being first to market with innovations, responding to customer needs before competitors recognize them, or implementing strategic changes while others are still discussing possibilities. Speed creates momentum, and momentum creates additional opportunities that can compound into decisive advantages. The smooth riverstone I keep on my desk has been shaped by countless encounters with flowing water, each interaction wearing away rough edges until only the essential form remains. This stone teaches the same lesson that transformed my understanding of strategy. True strength comes not from rigidity, but from the ability to adapt while maintaining your core purpose. Water became my greatest teacher after I watched my most carefully planned campaign collapse when conditions changed unexpectedly. I had spent months developing what I believed was the perfect strategied plans for every contingency, precise timing for each phase, specific tactics for anticipated enemy responses. When the campaign began, I was confident that my thorough preparation would guarantee victory. Then it rained for 3 weeks straight. The roads became impassable. Supply wagons got stuck in mud, and the terrain I had selected for its strategic advantages became a waterlogged nightmare. My enemy, rather than following the patterns I had studied, adapted quickly to the new conditions and began using tactics I hadn't anticipated. My rigid plan became a liability rather than an asset. I watched in fascination as the enemy commander flowed around my positions like water around obstacles. When I fortified one area, he simply found another route. When I concentrated forces in one location, he dispersed and attacked from multiple directions. He seemed to have no fixed plan, yet every move served his ultimate objective. That's when I began studying water itself, how it moves, how it overcomes obstacles, how it finds its way to the sea regardless of what stands in its path. Water doesn't fight rock directly. It flows around it, over it, or gradually wears it away. Water doesn't maintain a single shape. It adapts to every container while never losing its essential nature. I realized that my approach to strategy had been backwards. Instead of creating detailed plans and trying to force reality to conform to them, I needed to maintain clear objectives while allowing my methods to flow and adapt based on changing conditions. This insight revolutionized how I approached every subsequent campaign. I began developing what I called fluid strategies, approaches that maintained consistent direction toward clear goals while remaining flexible about specific tactics and timing. Instead of rigid battle plans, I created frameworks that could adapt to whatever circumstances arose. I learned to prepare my forces for multiple possibilities rather than single scenarios. We practiced rapid formation changes, alternative tactics for different terrain, and quick transitions between offensive and defensive positions. Most importantly, I trained my officers to think adaptively rather than simply follow predetermined orders. The results were remarkable. My forces became nearly impossible to defeat because we could respond to any tactical surprise. When enemies tried to counter our strategies, they found that we had already shifted to new approaches. Like water flowing downhill, we found the path of least resistance while never losing sight of our destination. In modern terms, this means staying flexible about methods while remaining committed to goals. The entrepreneur who adapts their business model based on market feedback succeeds where those who rigidly stick to original plans often fail. The professional who adjusts their approach based on changing organizational needs advances faster than those who insist on doing things one way. The general seal that bears my personal mark represents more than authorities, symbolizes the unified command that transforms collections of individuals into unstoppable forces. This carved jade stamp reminds me daily that divided leadership guarantees failure, while clear, singular direction creates power that multiplies far beyond the sum of individual efforts. I learned this principle through observing the collapse of what should have been an overwhelming alliance. 7 kingdoms had joined forces against a common enemy, bringing together armies that outnumbered their opposition by more than 5 to 1. On paper, victory seemed inevitable. In reality, the alliance was defeated decisively because it had 7 different commanders with 7 different strategies. I watched from a distance as these armies worked against each other while believing they were cooperating. One commander wanted to attack immediately. Another insisted on waiting for better weather. A third demanded additional supplies before moving. When they finally agreed to advance, they couldn't coordinate their movements because each leader interpreted orders differently. The enemy, though vastly outnumbered, had one commander with absolute authority. His forces moved like a single organism, swift, coordinated, and completely unified in purpose. While the alliance debated, he struck. While they tried to coordinate 7 different battle plans, he executed one clear strategy. The superior numbers meant nothing because the larger force couldn't act decisively. This disaster taught me that unity of command isn't just about military hierarchy, it's about the fundamental principle that effective action requires singular direction. When multiple voices compete for authority, energy gets wasted on internal conflicts rather than external objectives. I began studying how to create this unity even when I wasn't the official leader. True command authority doesn't come from titles or position, it comes from demonstrating competence, earning trust, and providing clear direction that others want to follow. The most effective leaders I've observed create unity through influence rather than force. Unity of command starts with unity of vision. Everyone involved must understand not just what they're supposed to do, but why they're doing it and how their role contributes to the overall objective. When people share a common understanding of the goal and their part in achieving it, coordination becomes natural rather than forced. I learned to communicate objectives in ways that left no room for misinterpretation. Instead of general directives, like advance toward the enemy, I gave specific instructions: move to the hill marked by 3 large trees, establish defensive positions facing north, and wait for the horn signal before engaging. Clear communication eliminates the confusion that destroys coordination, but unity doesn't mean uniformity. The best unified forces leverage diverse skills and perspectives while maintaining singular direction. I encouraged my officers to contribute ideas and insights, but once decisions were made, everyone committed completely to the chosen course of action. In modern contexts, this principle applies to every team effort. The startup with multiple founders often fails because no one has final authority to make crucial decisions. The project with unclear leadership typically misses deadlines and exceeds budgets because team members receive conflicting guidance. Whether you're officially in charge or simply trying to influence outcomes, you can create unity by providing clear vision, consistent communication, and demonstrable competence. When people understand the direction and trust the leadership, they naturally coordinate their efforts toward shared success. The false battle standard that once led enemy forces into my carefully prepared trap now hangs in my chamber as a reminder that perception often matters more than reality. This decoy banner, indistinguishable from my actual command flag, represents the subtle art of misdirection that can turn overwhelming disadvantages into decisive victories. Deception in strategy isn't about lies or dishonesty, it's about controlling what opponents see, understand, and expect. When enemies base their decisions on incomplete or misleading information, they defeat themselves by responding to situations that don't actually exist. I first understood this principle during a siege where I was trapped inside a fortress with insufficient supplies and no hope of reinforcement. The enemy commander knew our situation and was content to wait until starvation forced our surrender. Conventional military thinking offered no solution. We were genuinely trapped with no way to fight our way out. Instead of accepting defeat, I began studying what the enemy could observe about our situation. They could see our walls, count up visible soldiers, and monitor traffic in and out of the fortress. but they couldn't see inside our stores, know our exact numbers, or understand our internal condition. I realized that their confidence came from assumptions, not complete knowledge. I began a careful campaign of misdirection. During the day, I had soldiers march in formation along the walls, making the same circuit multiple times to create the illusion of larger numbers. I arranged for cooking fires to be lit at locations suggesting abundant supplies. Most importantly, I had small groups of soldiers leave the fortress openly each night, as if carrying messages or seeking supplies. The enemy interpreted these activities as signs of confidence and preparation for extended resistance. They began to doubt their assessment of our weakness. Perhaps we had hidden supplies, or reinforcements were coming, or we were planning some sort of counterattack. Their certainty gradually transformed into uncertainty. Meanwhile, the soldiers, leaving each night, weren't actually messengers. They were advanced scouts who were secretly studying the enemy camp, identifying weak points, and preparing for a coordinated assault. When we finally attacked, it came from directions the enemy hadn't anticipated. At a time when their vigilance was lowest, using tactics they hadn't prepared to counter, we achieved complete victory, not through superior strength, but through superior control of information. The enemy's decisions were based on what they thought they knew rather than actual reality. The key to effective deception is understanding your opponent's decision-making process. What information do they rely on? What assumptions do they make? What would cause them to change their strategy? Once you understand how they think, you can influence their thoughts by controlling what they observe. This doesn't require elaborate schemes or complex lies. Often, the most effective misdirection comes from emphasizing certain truths while obscuring others. In business, this might mean highlighting your strengths while keeping weaknesses private. In negotiations, it might mean showing confidence about alternatives while concealing your true priorities. The ethical dimension of strategic deception lies in the distinction between protecting your interests and causing undeserved harm. Using misdirection to achieve legitimate objectives differs fundamentally from deception intended to cheat or exploit others unfairly. The hand-drawn battlefield maps that cover my walls tell stories of victories won before the first sword was drawn. Each careful line and marking represents hours of studying terrain, understanding how geography shapes conflict, and learning to position forces so that the environment itself becomes a weapon. Most commanders think of terrain as background, something to overcome, rather than something to exploit. I learned that mastering your environment is often more important than mastering your weapons. The right position can make a small force defeat a large one, while the wrong position can turn certain victory into devastating defeat. I discovered this truth during a campaign where my army faced an enemy twice our size on an open plain. According to conventional wisdom, we should have retreated to seek better odds elsewhere. But I had spent days studying the local geography and noticed something others had missed: a series of low hills that didn't look significant but created natural choke points. Instead of fleeing, I positioned my forces on these hills in a way that forced the enemy to attack uphill through narrow passages. Their numerical advantage became meaningless because they could only engage a fraction of their forces at any time. What's more, the terrain channeled their attacks into predictable patterns that allowed my smaller force to respond with devastating effectiveness. The battle was won by geography, not by superior fighting. The enemy had more soldiers, better equipment, and experienced commanders, but they had given me the advantage of choosing where the conflict would occur. Superior positioning neutralized all their advantages and magnified all of mine. This experience taught me to evaluate every competitive landscape through the lens of positioning. In any conflict, certain positions offer natural advantages: better access to resources, superior visibility, more strategic options, or greater defensibility. The key is learning to recognize these advantages and claiming them before your opponents. realized their value. I began developing systematic approaches to terrain analysis. First, I studied the physical characteristics that affect movement, visibility, and tactical options. High ground usually provides advantages in observation and defense. Narrow passages limit the effectiveness of superior numbers. Natural barriers, like rivers or forests, can protect flanks or create obstacles for opponents. Second, I analyzed how terrain affects supply lines and communication. Positions that seem strong tactically may become liabilities if they're difficult to resupply or if they isolate forces from support. The best positions offer both tactical advantages and strategic sustainability. Third, I considered how environmental factors influence morale and psychology. Fighting from positions that feel secure boosts confidence, while attacking uphill or across difficult terrain can demoralize even superior forces. The psychological impact of terrain often matters as much as its tactical effects, but terrain isn't just about physical geographies, about understanding the complete competitive environment. In modern contexts, this means recognizing the structural advantages available in any situation. The entrepreneur who understands market positioning can dominate established competitors. The professional who positions themselves at the intersection of important trends gains influence beyond their formal authority. The principle remains constant. Control your environment whenever possible and adapt your strategy to environmental realities when control isn't possible. Winners position themselves where their strengths are amplified and their weaknesses are minimized, while opponents face the opposite conditions. The worn wheel from a supply wagon sits in my study as a reminder that the most brilliant tactics mean nothing without the mundane foundation of logistics. This simple wooden wheel, scarred by countless miles of rough roads, represents a truth that many leaders ignore to their destruction. Armies march on their stomachs, and victory belongs to those who can sustain their efforts longest. I learned this lesson through a devastating failure that taught me to respect the unglamorous realities of supply and sustainment. In my youth, I was obsessed with dramatic tactical maneuvers and brilliant strategic insights. I spent countless hours perfecting battle formations while paying little attention to the boring details of food, equipment, and transportation. During one campaign, I achieved a series of stunning tactical victories that should have led to complete triumph. My forces consistently outmaneuvered the enemy, won every engagement, and captured strategic objectives with minimal casualties. Observers praised my tactical genius, and I believed that superior strategy had guaranteed success. Then my supply lines collapsed. The enemy commander, while losing every battle, had been systematically disrupting my logistics network. Small raids against supply convoys, attacks on forward depots, and sabotage of transportation routes had gradually weakened my ability to sustain operations. I had been so focused on winning battles that I hadn't noticed I was losing the war. Within days, my tactical advantages became meaningless. Soldiers couldn't fight effectively when they were hungry, thirsty, and short on ammunition. Equipment broke down without replacement parts. Wounded soldiers couldn't be properly treated without medical supplies. My brilliant army began to disintegrate, not from enemy action, but from internal collapse. The enemy commander then launched his counter-offensive not when my forces were strongest, but when our logistics failures had made us vulnerable. He had understood something I had missed. Sustainable capability matters more than peak performance. He had deliberately sacrificed short-term tactical advantages to create long-term strategic weaknesses in my position. This humbling experience transformed my approach to strategy. I began to understand that logistics isn't just about moving supplies, it's about creating systems that can sustain excellence over time. The most effective forces aren't necessarily the most skilled. They're the ones that can maintain their effectiveness longest under pressure. I started designing campaigns around logistical realities, rather than tactical possibilities. Before planning any operation, I first ensured that I could supply it adequately for the duration required. This meant understanding not just immediate needs, but the flow of resources, the reliability of supply chains, and the vulnerabilities that enemies might exploit. I learned to make logistics a weapon rather than just a necessity. Well-supplied forces can maintain pressure longer, exploit opportunities more quickly, and recover from setbacks more effectively. Superior logistics often creates tactical opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. In modern applications, this principle applies to every sustained effort. The entrepreneur who focuses only on product development while ignoring cash flow management often fails, despite having superior innovations. The professional who builds skills without building the support systems to apply them effectively struggles to advance their career. Success requires both the capability to perform and the foundation to sustain that performance over time. The most spectacular achievements mean nothing if you can't maintain them when challenges arise. The victory drum that once rallied my troops and struck fear into enemy hearts now serves as a constant reminder that the human spirit determines outcomes more than weapons, numbers, or tactical brilliance. This bronze instrument, worn smooth by countless battles, represents the invisible force that transforms ordinary individuals into extraordinary warriors. I discovered the power of morale during the darkest period of my military career. My forces were trapped in hostile territory, outnumbered, undersupplied, and facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger each day. By every rational measure, we should have surrendered or attempted retreat. Instead, something remarkable happened. Soldiers began fighting with a ferocity and determination that defied logical explanation. The transformation didn't come from new weapons or tactical innovations. It came from a shared belief that our cause was just, our methods were honorable, and our ultimate victory was inevitable. This conviction spread through the ranks like wildfire, creating a psychological momentum that became more powerful than any physical advantage. I watched ordinary farmers and merchants perform acts of heroism that amazed veteran warriors. I saw wounded soldiers refuse to leave their posts, exhausted men find energy for one more charge, and frightened recruits stand firm against overwhelming odds. The difference wasn't in their abilities, it was in their spirit. This experience taught me that morale isn't just about feeling good or maintaining optimism. True fighting spirit comes from deep conviction about the worthiness of the struggle, confidence in the leadership, and absolute faith in eventual victory. When people believe completely in what they're fighting for, they discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. I began studying the elements that create unbreakable morale. First, people need to understand the purpose behind their efforts. Soldiers who know why they're fighting perform better than those who simply follow orders. The meaning doesn't have to be grand or philosophical, it just has to be personally compelling and clearly connected to their actions. Second, they need confidence in their leaders. This confidence comes not from authority or charisma, but from demonstrated competence and genuine care for those being led. When people trust that their leaders will make good decisions and won't waste their efforts, they commit more fully to difficult challenges. Third, they need evidence that victory is possible. This doesn't mean guaranteeing success, but showing that the strategy is sound, progress is being made, and their efforts are contributing to measurable advancement toward the goal. I learnt to communicate these elements through both words and actions. I made sure every soldier understood not just their immediate tasks, but how those tasks contributed to our overall objective. I shared information about our progress, acknowledged our setbacks honestly, and consistently demonstrated that I would never ask them to do something I wouldn't do myself. The victory drum became a symbol of these principles. When it sounded, it reminded everyone of our shared purpose, our past successes, and our commitment to each other. The sound itself became a source of strength that could rally exhausted troops and intimidate confident enemies. In modern contexts, the same principles apply to any group effort. Teams with high morale consistently outperform more skilled groups with poor spirit. The key is creating genuine belief in the mission, trust in the leadership, and confidence in the possibility of success. The smooth meditation stone that sits before me during my daily contemplations holds the key to understanding true invincibility. This simple piece of jade, worn smooth by countless hours of handling, represents the inner foundation that makes external victory possible. After decades of studying warfare, I've learned that genuine invincibility comes not from perfect tactics or superior resources, but from a philosophical understanding of conflict itself. Most people think invincibility means never losing, never facing setbacks, never encountering opposition. This shallow understanding leads to brittle strategies that shatter when unexpected challenges arise. True invincibility means creating conditions where defeat becomes impossible, not because you avoid all conflicts, but because you've developed the wisdom to navigate any conflict successfully. I began developing this philosophy after achieving what others considered the pinnacle of military success. I had won every major battle, defeated every significant enemy, and established my reputation as an unbeatable commander. Yet I felt increasingly aware that my victories were temporary and fragile. They depended on specific circumstances, particular opponents, and favorable conditions that wouldn't last forever. This realization led me to study the nature of conflict itself. I began to understand that battles are external manifestations of deeper principles that govern all competitive situations. The commander who understands these principles can adapt to any enemy, any terrain, any circumstance. The one who relies only on specific tactics or situational advantages remains vulnerable to new challenges. I discovered that invincibility emerges from the integration of several philosophical insights. First, the recognition that conflict is fundamentally about information and psychology, not just physical force. The commander who better understands the situation and can influence how opponents think and feel will usually prevail, regardless of material disadvantages. Second, the understanding that victory comes from creating inevitable outcomes rather than forcing desired results. The invincible strategist shapes conditions so that success becomes the natural consequence of existing forces, rather than the result of extraordinary effort or luck. Third, the acceptance that true strength comes from flexibility and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to fixed plans. The invincible leader can respond to any challenge because they understand principles that transcend specific situations. Most importantly, I learned that invincibility requires what I call strategic detachment, the ability to remain emotionally uninvested in particular outcomes while staying completely committed to effective action. This doesn't mean not caring about results, but rather not allowing attachment to specific victories to cloud judgment about what actions will actually produce desired outcomes. This philosophical foundation changes how you approach every competitive situation. Instead of focusing on beating particular opponents, you focus on understanding the dynamics that determine success in that type of conflict. Instead of preparing for specific challenges, you develop the adaptability to handle unexpected situations effectively. The meditation stone reminds me daily that external invincibility flows from internal mastery. When you understand the principles that govern conflict, develop the flexibility to apply them in any situation, and maintain the emotional balance to act wisely under pressure, you become truly unbeatable. Not because you never face opposition, but because you've developed the wisdom to transform any opposition into opportunity for advancement. The jade compass that guided my armies through unknown territories now points to a profound truth. The strategic principles that governed ancient warfare remain as relevant today as they were 2,500 years ago. This navigational tool represents the timeless nature of conflict dynamics, regardless of the specific arena where competition occurs. When I observe modern challenges, business competition, career advancement, relationship dynamics, personal development, I see the same fundamental patterns that shaped ancient battlefields. The weapons have changed, the terrain looks different, but the underlying principles of strategic thinking remain constant, because they're based on unchanging aspects of human nature and competitive dynamics. Consider the modern entrepreneur facing established competitors. They may not carry swords or command armies, but they're engaged in the same type of strategic challenge I faced when confronting superior forces. The principles I used: understanding terrain, choosing battles carefully, using speed and surprise, gathering intelligence about competitors, apply directly to business strategy. I've observed successful entrepreneurs who instinctively apply my teachings without knowing their ancient origins. They study their market terrain as carefully as I studied battlefields, identifying positioning advantages that larger competitors have overlooked. They choose their battles by focusing on market segments where they can compete effectively rather than attacking established players head-on. They use speed and surprise by bringing innovations to market faster than incumbents can respond. They gather intelligence about competitor strategies, customer needs, and market trends with the same systematic approach I used for military intelligence. Most importantly, they understand that business success, like military victory, comes from creating conditions where positive outcomes become inevitable. The same patterns appear in career advancement. Professionals who rise rapidly often display strategic thinking that mirrors military campaigns. They understand organizational terrain, knowing where power really lies, which battles are worth fighting, and how to position themselves for maximum advantage. They build alliances, gather intelligence about organizational dynamics, and time their moves for maximum impact. I've seen individuals transform their careers by applying principles of strategic positioning. Instead of working harder in their current roles, they identify emerging opportunities where their skills create disproportionate value. They build reputations in areas where demand is growing faster than supply. They cultivate relationships with decision-makers who can influence their advancement. Even personal relationships follow strategic principles. The most successful partnerships involve people who understand the importance of mutual benefit, clear communication, and strategic patience. They don't try to win every argument or control every situation. Instead, they focus on creating conditions where both parties can achieve their important objectives. The key to applying ancient wisdom to modern challenges lies in understanding that surface differences don't change underlying dynamics. Whether you're leading a tech startup or commanding cavalry, the fundamental requirements for success remain consistent. Clear objectives, accurate intelligence, strategic positioning, proper timing, unified action, and the flexibility to adapt when circumstances change. Modern leaders who master these timeless principles gain the same advantages I achieved in ancient China. They can outmaneuver competitors with superior resources, achieve objectives that seem impossible to others, and create sustainable success in rapidly changing environments. The compass that guided ancient armies can guide anyone through the complexities of contemporary competition. The personal battle scroll I created for each campaign now serves as the template for your own transformation into an unbeatable force. This customized strategy document represents the systematic approach that turns ancient wisdom into modern results. Just as I never entered battle without a carefully prepared plan, you must never face your challenges without a strategic framework for victory. Creating your personal war plan begins with brutal self-assessment, the foundation of all. Strategic thinking. Take inventory of your genuine strengths, not what you wish they were, or what others have told you they should be. What capabilities can you actually rely on when pressure mounts? What knowledge do you possess that others lack? What relationships provide real support when needed? Next, honestly evaluate your weaknesses and limitations. This isn't about self-criticism, it's about tactical reality. What skills do you need to develop? What blind spots consistently create problems? What patterns of behavior undermine your effectiveness? Understanding your limitations allows you to compensate for them strategically rather than being surprised by them. Repeatedly, now assess your competitive environment with the same systematic approach I used for military intelligence. Who are your real competitors? And what are their strengths and weaknesses? What opportunities exist that others haven't recognized? What threats are emerging that could disrupt your current position? What resources and alliances are available to support your advancement? With this intelligence foundation, you can begin designing your strategic approach. Choose your battles carefully. Not every opportunity deserves your attention, and not every challenge requires direct confrontation. Focus your energy on conflicts where your strengths provide advantage and where victory advances your larger objectives. Develop your positioning strategy by identifying where you can create unique value. This might mean specializing in skills that are increasingly rare, positioning yourself at the intersection of important trends, or building relationships that provide access to opportunities others can't reach. The goal is to make yourself indispensable in areas that matter. Create your timing strategy by understanding the rhythms of opportunity in your field. When do advancement opportunities typically occur? What seasonal patterns affect your industry? How can you position yourself to be ready when moments of maximum opportunity arise? Remember that preparation during quiet periods determines success during active ones. Build your intelligence. Network by systematically cultivating relationships with people who can provide insights about trends, opportunities, and challenges in your area of focus. This isn't about using people, it's about creating mutually beneficial relationships where information flows in both directions. Develop your adaptation protocols by preparing for multiple scenarios rather than betting everything on single outcomes. What will you do if your current strategy doesn't work? How will you respond to unexpected opportunities? What contingency plans will keep you moving forward when circumstances change? Most importantly, create daily practices that build your strategic capabilities over time. This means regular self-assessment, continuous learning about your competitive environment, systematic skill development, and consistent relationship building. Strategic thinking isn't something you do occasionally. It's a way of approaching every decision and interaction. Track your progress using specific metrics that reflect advancement toward your objectives. Are you building capabilities that increase your value? Are you positioning yourself for emerging opportunities? Are you creating the conditions where your success becomes inevitable rather than hoping for favorable circumstances? Remember that becoming unbeatable is a process, not an event. Each day you implement these strategic principles, you become more formidable, more resilient, and more capable of achieving whatever objectives you set for yourself. The victory monument that stands in my courtyard bears the names of all who mastered these eternal principles and achieved true invincibility. This lasting tribute represents not just past achievements, but the transformation that awaits anyone who fully embraces the strategic wisdom I've shared with you today. When you truly integrate these principles into your daily life, you'll experience a profound shift in how you approach every challenge. Situations that once seemed impossible will become manageable problems with clear solutions. Competitors who once intimidated you will become opportunities to apply superior strategy. Obstacles that once stopped you will become stepping stones to greater success. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen inevitably for those who commit to the path. I've watched countless individuals discover their own invincibility by applying these ancient truths to modern challenges. They begin as ordinary people facing ordinary difficulties, but through consistent strategic thinking, they develop capabilities that seem extraordinary to others. The first change you'll notice is in your decision-making process. Instead of reacting emotionally to challenges, you'll find yourself naturally analyzing situations strategically. You'll ask the right questions. What are the real dynamics at play here? What advantages do I possess? What would victory actually look like? How can I position myself for an inevitable success? Your confidence will grow, not the false confidence of ignorance, but the deep assurance that comes from understanding the principles that govern competitive success. You'll know that regardless of what challenges emerge, you have the tools to handle them effectively. This isn't arrogance, it's strategic self-awareness. Your relationships will improve because you'll understand the importance of mutual benefit, clear communication, and strategic patience. You'll stop trying to win every argument and start focusing on achieving important objectives. People will be drawn to your calm competence and strategic thinking. Your professional advancement will accelerate because you'll see opportunities others miss and position yourself to capitalize on them. While others react to changes, you'll anticipate them. While others compete directly, you'll find uncontested spaces where your unique value creates disproportionate returns. But perhaps most importantly, you'll develop what I call strategic peace, the inner calm that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents. You'll stop feeling like a victim of circumstances and start feeling like the architect of your own destiny. This mastery carries with it both opportunity and responsibility. When you become truly unbeatable, you have the power to influence outcomes, not just for yourself, but for others. The principles that create personal invincibility also create the capability to lead, inspire, and elevate those around you. I challenge you to use these gifts wisely. Help others discover their own strategic capabilities. Share these principles with those who are struggling. Use your growing influence to create positive change in your communities and organizations. The monument to victory is ultimately built, not just from personal achievements, but from the lasting impact you have on others. The path to invincibility begins with a single step: the decision to think strategically about your challenges rather than simply react to them. Every principle I've shared with you has been tested in the crucible of real conflict and proven effective. Across centuries of application, you now possess the same strategic wisdom that guided my armies to victory, that has inspired leaders throughout history, and that continues to create success in every arena of human endeavor. The only question remaining is whether you'll apply it consistently enough to discover your own invincible nature. The future belongs to those who think strategically, act decisively, and never stop learning. Your victory monument awaits. Begin building it today.